Hey folks, this is Adam. I hope you're doing well, and this is the Waffletrack for Attack the Block. Now, if you didn't realize already, I've done a small video on Attack the Block, small script, covered the basics, enough for people to find out about the film, a little bit about it, and then if they want to watch it, they can. But after watching the film a few times, I then had to edit the video. And that had all sorts of fun and games with YouTube's copyright system, and also the requirement as well for me to, get suitable stills for suitable moments. So in a sense, as much as I'd watched the film before and scribbled notes down, it was the editing process where I found out a lot more about the film. I picked up smaller things, sometimes literally going frame by frame. But you can't suddenly change the script. You can't suddenly change what you want to say every time you see something extra in the film. Now for me, as a learning experience, well, that means I just need to watch the film a hell of a lot more and do the still by still, moment to moment checks before I write the script. But in the case of Attack the Block, I was already going through the editing process. And if I changed everything every time I discovered something new, I'd never get this thing finished. So I thought, let's do a little bit of a waffle at the end. And this waffling is very similar to what I record with Big D on the Fluff and Hammer podcast. So it kind of feels right. So what other bits did I notice then from Attack the Block? Well, some of the stuff that I picked up on was from making ofs, documentaries and interviews. And that was the director's background. Now, director Joe Cornish, he came up in that period of time, not too dissimilar to myself, the 80s and 90s, where the availability of movies and movie commentaries and making ofs and documentaries was literally flooding the market. If you wanted to learn about film, you didn't really need to go to film school. You just need to watch a lot of these films and see how directors create stories, how they film them, how they choose lines, how they work with characters, this, that, the other. You've got DVD commentaries that talk about the making of the movie. You've got extras where storyboards are included to show you how they sketched out scenes. You have so much knowledge. The DVD store was a form of film school, and that's not like a big deal. There's a whole generation of directors that came up through learning the 60s and 70s films, and then you had another batch that came from the 80s film set and VHS, and each generation of media and films produces a different type of director, or a different batch of directors, should I say. And Joe came from that, and it's wonderful that he also mentions watching movies late night on TV, and that's something that used to be a lot more prevalent back then, mostly because of the setup for terrestrial channels in the UK. You see, in the UK, we had, for the longest time that I can remember, we had 3 channels. Then we had Channel 4, which appeared in the 80s. It was a channel with adverts, a channel that aimed to show a little bit more expansive forms of TV and shows and movies, maybe go a little bit more riskier, a bit more topical, a bit more worldview on certain events, and just be a bit, encourage more of niche audiences to tune in to various individual programs. But they weren't alone, because on the flip side you had the state-owned channel, which is the BBC, and you had BBC Two, which was the more arty side of the BBC. So between BBC Two and Channel 4, mostly on Friday nights, at least one of them would be hosting some form of specialized movie, be it a horror movie, be it a thriller, be it suspense, be it a controversial movie, be it a drama, be it a world movie that you've not heard from before. Channel 4 and BBC Two were responsible for the first time that I saw Aliens. It was the first time I saw films by Jim Jarmusch. It was the first time that I saw Tetsuo, the Iron Man, Akira, anime. You had shows like Mondo Rosso, which, for those who don't know, it was a movie critic in the UK called Jonathan Ross that used to be on terrestrial TV, now is on satellite, but was one of the most influential film reviewers of that time because he was into the latest stuff. It wasn't like the more senior person on the BBC who would review movies very seriously and, you know, adopt the viewpoint of like the general public. This was more based on, you know, what's cool, what's good. And to show you how influential that was, a movie show that he did where he talked about various topics called Mondo Rosso, that was a program that was beloved by Quentin Tarantino. So we had very, very good film shows and shows about filmmakers and films on those channels. And so a lot of people who were then going to film school years later would have this vast array of knowledge of films and influences, and they would use them throughout their work. But of course, it wasn't just a large amount of films on TV. It was also the availability of technology. And for people in the 80s and 90s, you had this crossover from the old style of filmmaking at home, which was Super 8. All Super 8 is, as well, for those who have no idea what it is, you know what 35mm film looks like, be it in a 35mm movie camera, or you've seen a projector, or you've seen a picture of a projector at least, or, you know, maybe you've even been lucky to take some photos on an old style film camera. Well, it doesn't matter that the material of film, think of it as it's one material, it's exactly the same, but depending on the camera and depending on the type of camera, it's used in different ways. So a still camera takes 1 frame, that's it. A movie camera just takes 24 frames a second. When you look at a photo that you've taken, well, you look at the one image, don't you? You print out a picture. Whereas film is projected, so there's 24 frames, play back through a projector, hence the movement. And when people talk about 16, Super 8 and all of this type of stuff, all that means is that the film is different sizes. Now you have this, you know about this. Anyone who has a camera phone knows about this because you know all about resolution. You know it's something to do with a chip, and the bigger the chip, the bigger the frame, and the more resolution. Well, funnily enough, it's the same with film. The bigger the frame, the larger size of frame that you have in there means that the exposure, your shot, is going to be more detailed. 8mm is 8mm. Then you have 16, funnily enough, it's just twice the size of 8mm. And then you have 35mm, which funnily enough is just over twice the size of 16mm. So you, again, all these sorts of formats. Heck, people even know what IMAX is nowadays. People know what IMAX is as a brand more than anything else. But IMAX is a type of camera. It is a type of very large open camera. So the frame is huge. So your detail is huge. So when you see it back on a big screen, you're like, wow, this is amazing. But all it really is just sizes of film. Now I say that because, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, Super 8 was falling out of fashion. The whole home movie environment was just collapsing on film because of the rise of the home camcorder and the home digital unit. And for a while, especially when camcorders first came in, and you know, I'm talk about age here, but there's a lot of people that won't even know about camcorders because camera phones have taken over so much. But when they first made these VHS units, very much like the Super 8 films, they tried to put as much film stuff on there as possible, make them seem as professional as possible. And so you had these little small movie cameras. Funnily enough, the most famous one I think captured in a film, as in used in a film, is in Back to the Future, because you know that plays back, that records. It's described by Doc Brown as a portable movie studio, and they really were. But you ended up with people then they would take these home movies, they would record this was the start of going to a kids' school play, and half the people in the audience would be filming it. And of course, that led to a lot of people then using film cameras, especially kids, using film cameras to make their own movies. And that's what a lot of people did. And it's really telling that both Joe and Edgar Wright, who obviously was the exec producer on this, they both had the sort of upbringings where they were making their own movies anyway. Like growing up, they made movies and they were working out how to make movies themselves before they ever went into education. It's one of those things that I encourage people to do. If they want to do films, just do a film. If you want to shoot something, shoot something. Famously, I think I persuaded somebody at film school, and yes, I will mention that in a second in regards to the film, but somebody at film school didn't want to do a project. He said, "Oh, I can't do it. It's, I can't book out the equipment." And I was like, "Mate, you could just grab something. You could just shoot something on anything." And just after we left film school, I asked him again. He said, "Oh no, I can't do anything. We haven't got any access to film stuff. I can't go back into film school." I was like, "Yeah, but you got a camera phone. You can shoot something on that. You got a camcorder. You can shoot something on that." I think having that can-do attitude means that you learn a lot of the basics of creating films on your own. You learn about shot structure, you learn what works, what doesn't, you learn about setup times and just the hassle of it's just a frame, but you might have 20 lights in the background and 15 actors, and you might have this and you might have that, and you probably don't have time, and that's the big deal. So it's really refreshing to hear that Joe and Edgar, they went to film school, but they also come from that background of just getting on and figuring stuff out. And that's great in this film because you can see that there's been a lot of work gone into making this film, like, I want to say, if I say easily achievable, that downsells it. But no, they know what they want. They've got a really clever idea, a really tight script, and then they've maximized every element of it. Now, just before I go on to the script, I do want to quickly mention as well a link that Joe and Edgar both have, and it's one that I have to them, and that is Bournemouth Film School. Now, Joe went to Bournemouth Film School, I'd say about 5 years before I did, I believe, I can't say for certain. Edgar actually went to a media course. He didn't go to the film school. And this is something that in the years that have passed, I've always been a little bit annoyed about on behalf of Edgar. You see, when I joined the Bournemouth Film School, it already had this very premium reputation. It was in a period of transition. We were the last year of the old style film school. The year after us, it became a 3-year degree, and people started worrying about degrees as opposed to getting on film sets, which is something that always slightly worried me, but I hope that that's changed since. I'm sure it has. But when I was there was this reticence to actually just go out and shoot stuff. It was like, well, you have to wait for a writer to write it and a director to be interested, and it all had to be super official. But at the same time, if you're a cameraman, well, you needed to shoot stuff because you needed to learn your craft. And of course, if all of your film school are sort of waiting around and they don't want to do anything until, I don't know, the end of the year or a set time during the college year, well, you're kind of screwed for experience. Unless you step outside and seek work elsewhere in the industry, maybe as a runner or maybe as a camera trainee. But then that can leave your fellow students with a sour taste in their mouth, and they won't want to hire you because they think, well, you're not committed to the course. Well, there was an alternative. The alternative was the media course, and the media course, often looked down on by the film school, were just interested in media. And that's all forms. They did everything from web design to sound design to shooting to designing stuff, to creating graphics, animation. They had a little bit of everything. They weren't specialized. There was an animation course that was kind of part of the film school, and there was the film school, which is obviously the film school. But the media course was something else, and again, it was always kind of looked down on. But that was where I did most of my work during film school, because that course had the people that were most up for going out and shooting a film. It was great. It was absolutely wonderful. I've still got the list of all the films that I shot during that time, and the amount of films from that course and the amount of things I worked on. Heck, I even shot a 16mm film for them, which was chaotic and disastrous, but it was a film. The sad thing is that the year that I started at film school was the year after Edgar left. So if I'd started a year earlier, I probably would have worked with Edgar on a, and I'm going to say here as well, on a college film, because trust me, my path was very, very different through film school and afterwards. And actually, due to injuries that I'd received before film school, my film career, especially working as a spark or as a camera trainee or just in camera in general, it was always going to be cut short. So I've never begrudged that. Anyway, by the way, I did tell you this was a waffle. There's going to be a lot of diversions like this. So anyway, onto the script. So the script, just a really tight story. As I mentioned before, really tight story, really clear progression. Now, it was mentioned, I think it was on the Edgar and Joe commentary. They were talking about assembly cuts. And if people don't know, that's like taking everything that you've shot, everything you shot and want to use, you know, the good footage from the film, and it's taking a version of each, you know, shot. Like, so you haven't got 15 different repeats, just the same, the one thing, but then you put it together and it's almost like Lego bricks, and you just create the basic cut of the film, again called the assembly cut. Assembly cuts are not like director's cuts. They tend to be very basic. They tend to get the most amount of what is there, and then it's often a case of the editor and the director will choose to trim down and streamline. They might streamline plot points, they might take out locations, they might edit stuff to make the film flow in a different way. And of course, especially nowadays as well, with the more chaotic end of high-end filmmaking, you'll get to the assembly point and there won't be enough of certain elements, or the studio will want to add in another element, another story point, so you have to reshoot. That's why reshoots are reshoots. You know, you're adding in extra stuff to either fill a gap or create something new. Well, they said at the beginning to this that on this film, the assembly cut was really good. The assembly cut showed that they got enough footage. I think they had to get a few extra shots. I have to admit, in this moment of recording, I have now forgotten that fact, but I don't think there was much extra that wasn't already covered, and that there were no issues with missing or connecting footage. Again, that really speaks to Joe planning out the film, planning out the story, planning out the locations, being smart about all elements, really knowing what he was going to do. And this is his first big movie, but he's worked creating media for a decade before this, so, or maybe even two if you include his home movies. So yeah, really well planned out, really works, and that's the sort of stuff that helps films like this do really well. And also the use of storyboards. I saw storyboards pop up, and anytime that people's take a lot of care with storyboards, it really helps. And by the way, for those who are interested, I mean, my goodness, I don't know if anyone is ever going to hear this who's interested in filmmaking, but if you ever want to do any form of short film or film project or whatever, and you think the idea of storyboards is good for you to focus and get ideas down on a page, then do it. But the whole thing with storyboards is to get an idea of what you want. It's not to define it. I once had somebody draw me these immaculate, beautiful storyboards for a film, and nothing that he'd put down. And he was an artist, by the way. He was a really and this was at Bournemouth Film School. He had this really grand idea for this scene, and I had to tell him, look, that's physically impossible. You've drawn a room area that doesn't exist and doesn't tie up with what we've got here. I'm sorry, we're just gonna have to just shoot it the best way we can. You know, you can't be slavish to them. So the storyboards for Attack the Block, a lot of them are quite stylized, and there's comic stuff in there as well, which I really like, which gives you the feel of what it's doing. And that's the perfect sort of thing that helps your DP, your director of photography, in this case Tom Townend, to really do a great job in getting the essence, the feel of what the director wants. And before I say, by the way, I said about like, that you're missing like footage and you haven't got everything to cover a particular scene. And you know, you'd think that a script coordinator, script supervisor, and producers would be on set to ensure that doesn't happen. And yes, they are. But the realities of filmmaking are very different to the perception. I think still, even in this day and age, even with the sort of Marvel Universe kind of over sterilization of stuff and the use of those weird environment things that Disney have, you know, you're on set but there's like a green screen background and all of that sort of stuff. It's still very, very, very chaotic. So you can get to the end of a day and you suddenly realize, oh, we've not covered this. And the script supervisor is exhausted and the director's knackered and the cast are beaten up and the DP is shattered and the sparks are ready to collapse. And yet how you've suddenly managed to miss 2 scenes, it's like, okay, well, if we get to do it at the end, great. But if you don't have that time, well, you're screwed. So, you know, this does happen in films. So I mentioned that the story was simple. It was streamlined. It also as well benefits a lot from visual repeats. Now, visual repeats is something that is kind of a legacy of Shaun of the Dead. Now, films have used visual repeats constantly. It's not like a shock. I don't know, say a character walks from A to B at the start of the film and then 10 minutes later after something happens he makes the same journey again, but this time because of an action that he's taken, something is different, something has changed. I don't know, maybe you walk down the street and everything's fine, but that night you get into an argument with a neighbor. The next day you walk down that same street and suddenly all the neighbors are looking at you and they don't like you. So the audience knows, oh, it's this street, we've been here before, it's familiar, but then you notice the changes. And Shaun of the Dead was huge for this. You know, you had Simon Pegg crossing the road to go to the corner shop. You had trips back from the pub, or trips to back from the pub. You had the locations as well. You had the house, the pub. Like you knew where you were in the film for a lot of it. And of course then you have a central location, the Winchester, in which you have your main finale, the main focal point. You get familiar with it, you know it, great. Attack the Block is very, very similar. You see the gang and the smaller creature start out away from the block, and then after their little fight they then go back to the block and you get an introduction to it. And an introduction where the gang is feeling good, they're feeling cocky, they're feeling like, you know, they can take on the world. And you see almost all the areas of the block during that chat. You see, is it Probs and Mayhem? I'm going to get their names mixed up, apologies. Because I keep saying Props and Mayhem, but it's not, is it? Okay, Probs and Mayhem. You see them burning rubbish in one of the bins. It's not the exact bin that we see later, but we know bins are there. It's kind of telling you that this is here. You see them on the walkways, which is a really important part of a lot of council estates. They have this odd architecture, especially with the brutalist design. And although it's not in the film, and although I've not been able to confirm that there's nothing of it here, if you want to see stuff like this in terms of architecture, and you want to be safe, then go to the Barbican Centre in London, which is this incredibly foreboding estate, but is actually full of incredibly rich people, and it's the most gentrified place you could possibly imagine. It's arguably the safest place in London. Very great, crazy architecture, but it has that sci-fi atmosphere. And Joe wanted to get that kind of familiarity with the block as a character and these locations. And so when you're seeing the gang pass through them, you know roughly where you are and you get that map. So, you know, the gang, they go back out after like dumping this creature off, and they get chased back by the creatures to the block, and then you have that sort of repeat introduction. But of course, on the way, they've had, you know, the incident with hi-hats, they've had other bits and bobs. So although the gang entered the block really cocky the first time you saw them, and there's that little comedic moment with Luke Treadway's character at the left, you know, the gang are super cocky. But that same entrance then becomes the scene of the second return, the desperate dash, where Pest barely makes it and he gets injured. And that place isn't even safe. Where they were stood taking the mick out of Luke's character not half an hour beforehand, they're now dragging someone through with a busted leg. And as soon as they get round the corner, the door smashes in and they know the creatures are in the building. And then later on again, that entranceway is seen just from the outside as the girls are running away. And you've got the empty space there. And there's just, it uses that familiar place, that feel of, oh, I know where this is. But each time there's more and more horror. What else can I say about that? I suppose the other one is hallways. Hallways are huge in this film, because you see them again as normal hallways. Then you see them as places where the gang feels cocky. Then you see the creatures stalking them from the hall. Then Sam actually realizes that she needs to stick with the gang in a hallway, in a dark hallway. And they also use as well this idea of the push lights, you know, that are on for a small amount of time and then go off automatically. And so many scenes that the hallway goes from safe to unsafe. But each time that the hallway is used, there's a different element to it. And of course, eventually the hallway becomes a vulnerable area, because you have the smoke scene, which is again the same hall layout that you've seen all the way through these films, regardless of the floor. But the smoke means suddenly that it's almost fantastical, and it's horrific, and it's the scene of a death, and somebody gets lost in that small space, and it's brutal. So by the time you have the final scene in the hallway, you're genuinely petrified of that once safe space. Again, the bins get the same. The lifts as well. The lifts are ridiculous, because the lifts, like the characters use them as, you know, just transport naturally because they're lifts. But by the end, one of those lifts is still working normally, and the other one has 2 dismembered bodies in it and is covered in blood. Like, you're never going to see a block in the same way again, I'm sure, after you see this film. Anyway, I've talked about the character of the block. By the way, I'm not throwing every single idea into this, but you know, as many things as I think people can tolerate, plus my waffle. So of course, in terms of character journeys, we've got to talk about the gang, because that's I think the main element here. It's the spine of the film, and you see them originally from Sam's point of view. We see them with very little dialogue. Like, they've got their game attitude on, because they're obviously doing this, which I think is their first mugging. And you see very little of them with the clothing and stuff like that, and they're trying to be as hard as possible. And it's when Sam leaves after the car gets hit by the meteorite that we stay with the gang. And the creature attack, the creature chasing and killing, well, that doesn't actually change your perception of the gang much. That first little post-fight celebration just before the beginning credits, well, that's when you see the first little cracks of who the boys really are. That's when you see stuff starts to pop through. But it's after the credits when the boys visit what I want to say is a youth club, but it could just be like evening class. But that's when the film really strips them of a lot of that initial menace. Like, they're suddenly kids, and they're acting like kids, and they're tough kids, they're sharp kids, they're defensive kids, and they're probably ready for a scrap. But it's not the cold, almost deadly portrayal of the gang that you first see. Also, as well, around that time, you've got the first gang member speaking to his mother, and like parenting and stuff like that, that's a huge tool that is subtly used, I think, throughout the film with the gang, because every gang member gets a moment or moments with their parents or their guardians, apart from Moses. Even Sam is on the phone to her mum at the beginning before all of this starts. In fact, Sam on the phone to her mum, she starts in what would have been back then a super safe place, walking along a busy street, though now she's more likely to get her phone nicked. And also she has this interaction with the elderly resident, which is one of those odd things that it kind of feels a bit familiar. You know, like she's talking to a grandparent or something. I don't know. Like she has that safe background. It enhances the fact that she doesn't have gang relations. She has normal people relations. Now, while you can't judge everything from the short scenes with the parents and the gang members, you can't really judge everything about the personality of the gang from them. But they're used as a really clever little tool to help reflect some of the kids' outlooks, like to maybe point the audience's heads in the direction of, oh, that's why they are the way they are. Like, for instance, Moses has nobody, so he's focused on himself. Now, initially, you're not told that he has nobody. You're not told anything. If anything, it's kind of bigged up that he walks into his flat and there's nothing. And so you wonder if there's something really nasty behind the door. Of course, when it eventually comes out that Moses has basically been abandoned, that's heartbreaking. But you don't know that until the very end, and it's almost like it's only at the end that Sam has earned the right to ask, and Moses has earned the right to tell Sam, and she accepts it. Then you got Pest. Pest lives with his nan, so he is independent. He's doing whatever he wants to do, but he also shows a little caring side. It's like he kisses his nan on the forehead as he leaves, which shows that he's not a nasty guy, that he cares. Dennis, his only interaction with any family member is his father shouting at him, and he shouts back, and there's nothing personal, and you don't even see the guy. Like they don't even speak face to face. In fact, it's weird because with Dennis, the three things linked to Dennis are Dennis, his dad, who he shouts at and shouts back, and then his dog, who he shouts at the dog to get his dog, and then his dog runs off, completely ignores Dennis, and then literally runs what we think is to its own death. I'd kind of like it if it didn't die, but who knows on that one. Then you have Jerome. Jerome has what appears to be an older sister who's studying exams, and that's possibly a reason why he's the one gang member wearing his school uniform. Also why he's the most thoughtful of the group, because he has that older female influence. I'll come back to them at the end because their ending is really, really cruel. I think it's unintentional. And then you have Biggs. Biggs is pestered by his worried mother. That indicates his youth. Also as well, he's trying to show off to the team to look good with the jump. Funnily enough, it's Jerome who's very much like a parent who sort of pulls him back from doing the jump. But Biggs, he's kind of the innocent. So it's weird because when you rewatch the mugging at the beginning, I looked at Jerome and Biggs and wonder if they were ever happy with doing this. And I'm pretty sure that Jerome is the one that says about the police coming and we should stop. But I kind of get the feeling that he said that more because he didn't want to do this. And I mentioned as well, you've got a couple of the gang members who have positive relationships with female relatives. So you have Pest, you have Biggs, and you have Jerome. And of course Biggs gets trapped elsewhere, so he doesn't really meet Sam again. But Jerome and Pest do, and it's very telling that they react very quickly. They warm up to her. Like Jerome asks her about she's moved here, does she like the area? Like he starts conversation, he goes straight into conversation mode. Where Pest, who has a slightly different relationship with obviously his relative, he just starts flirting, which I think is hilarious. Finally, Moses and Sam. I love the way it's a real gradual softening attitude towards her. So, I think he wants her out of the way when it comes to the police van and the conversation with Hi-Hats. He just tells her to go away, which obviously she has no respect for him at this point. But then after they technically save each other's lives and there's more conversation and there's more to and fro, you end up with the final scene where he's asking forgiveness, which is something that he doesn't really know how to do because it's just not something that's in his background. He's not learnt how to do it. Like, he literally doesn't all the way through. Characters do say to him, you've caused this problem, you've caused these issues, but he doesn't know how to deal with it and say sorry. He does, however, know to take action to fix it. But at the end, the returning of the ring, the returning of the phone as well, which is really important, and allowing her to go into his place and basically destroy it because he realizes, he doesn't hold much affection for it. It shows how much that they've come together as characters. Right, now on to the monsters. Now I covered the monsters, I think, pretty well in the thing I recorded. The only other influence I think is the ISZ, I-S-Z, and it's from the Max comic. For those who remember the Max when Image first came out. But what I really love about them is, for a start, that they're really not defined. It's a really simple design choice that black fabric is so dark that it swallows light. They can hide in shots, they hide at the side of shots, the corner of it. There's darkness, they hide in reflections, they hide in smoke. And that's beautiful because it leaves more to your imagination. So the scene just after they got Jerome in the hallway, and Moses is looking to still take the fight to go out there, but he can see them in the smoke. And this is a hallway. This is a small hallway, and they look literally monstrous. It's fantastic. I was really tempted as well to add in a lot of making of footage of the monsters to the video that I posted. But when you see them physically on set, the stunt guys working with the cast, well, it obviously takes away a lot of the fear factor. And so even when I've talked about the monsters in the little short film, I tried to use as little overly graphic shots or overly clear shots of the monsters because I didn't want to spoil it for folks. Also, and I kind of like this, the monsters get the same treatment as the gang do in terms of dropping the veil, so to speak. So you see the gang first in attack mode during the mugging, and it's all super serious and it's all really, really imposing, and they mean business and they don't do much. They stand and they threaten. And it's only afterwards when you see them like together chatting that their human side comes out. Well, the monsters spend like 9/10 of the film just chasing after people and attacking people, but they're on the hunt. They've got the game face on. Whereas when you see them in like the second to last scene, which is when Sam's walking through them, well, they're mucking around with themselves. There's just a bunch of them in the flat. So you see them jumping over each other and snarling at each other and acting like little kids. And it's crazy because you realize that this is a different species, but it has a lot of traits that the gang has, which I think is fantastic. Okay, let's talk about the threat growth from the monsters. Because again, we don't see a lot of stuff in my bit about the monsters, even though they're on set, and we don't see a lot in the film, let's be honest, of the monsters until the end. You see glimpses, and the way that Joe treats the growth of the threat from the monsters is really smart. Like, you start off with the small attack, the smaller version of the creature injures Moses, and then the gang fight back and the gang wins, and it's like a super quick win for them, and the monster is basically shown as being speared, and it's no problem for them. The next time you see a monster, of course, is when the next wave arrive, and Pogo, the dog, gets killed, or we think gets killed, and then you see the first view of a larger monster, and you've been shown parts of the monster in a wreck, so you know to expect something more serious. But then you get that lovely first eye stroke teeth shock, and by that I mean that the design of the creatures is such that when their mouths are mostly closed, you just get the corners of their mouth open, and that looks very much like a pair of eyes. And even the characters say this in the film. But of course, once they open the mouths fully, you realize, no, it's a big mouthful of very big glowy teeth. And that little disconnect, every time you see them throughout the film, you look at it and you think eyes, and then it opens its mouth and you go, oh no, teeth. Brilliant, 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 brilliant. But although that's the scary moment, and of course the gang then run off, they pass Probs and Mayhem. And you know that the two kids get passed by those monsters. So the kids get untouched. It's never mentioned in the film. I know that there are some uncut scenes in places, and I'm probably going to feel very silly when I find out that there was a scene where Probs and Mayhem get passed by the monsters or ignored. But at that time, you don't want too much on the monsters. So you've just got them there. You just know that they're being chased. And of course, Joe uses the police to come in at this point and almost show the monsters up, like almost daring to be the bigger threat, because they do capture Moses. But then the monsters take out the police. And while the police aren't the bad guys, the police are kind of sacrificial here. You know, you don't mourn them. You're just like, oh, that shows them right. And yet, it's when the monsters are then left to start attacking the van that sound is really effectively used for them. And that's when their threat grows. And even though Dennis manages to kick a monster away, which is almost shockingly cavalier for him, it's clearly one of the most dangerous things he does. And I think it's the only one-on-one physical fight I think any gang member has. I'm not gonna count the monster under the bedclothes with the girls stabbing it with the ice skates, because that's a whole different thing. But yeah, Dennis kicks this monster away, and you think, well, that's okay. So it's just a bit of a pain. It's just a bit of an inconvenience. It's not a dangerous monster. But then you have the nod to Aliens and the alien jumping on the windscreen or jumping at the windscreen, and that's when it really starts to feel okay. We're hitting horror here. And then the hi-hats that crash, and then the henchman death. Well, that's the first death. Suddenly you realize, okay, this is getting real. And from there on, they just grow. So yes, the gang get to Sam's, but you see the monsters outside. And Sam's quickly stops being a safe place. They go to their friend's place. And of course that gets even worse. And it builds and builds and builds and builds. I've just said here, I've got another little note. I am reading for notes, obviously. And after the hi-hat situation, you do have hi-hats as his own monster. It's something that I didn't really mention too much within my review. And even now, I'm still not really touched much on him. Mostly because a lot of his anger is so misplaced. He's so focused on his control that he makes the very worst choices. He could have been a leader for the gang. He could have been the person that goes, right, my block is being attacked, therefore you are going to aid me and we will take this down. And considering that he has the weapon, the gang would have fallen behind him and, done whatever he said. And he could have really come out of this. He could have played the Moses role almost. Very, very weird. But he then becomes his own flavor of monster, if you like. And the fact that he is taken out in such a way is both sad but it's also a little bit fitting. It's like the police. He's one of those characters that you shouldn't really cheer him for being killed, because it's a terrible, sad situation for everyone in this film. But yeah, he was going to harm innocent people, so there you go. I mentioned the lighting and the sound. Sorry, there's not too much of a waffle left on this, I promise. The lighting and the sound are amazing in this film. The sound, obviously the noises of the creatures, it does a wonderful job, or they do a wonderful job of making you aware that these creatures are somewhere around. And in fact, the sound is almost better when the creatures aren't being seen, because you know there's danger somewhere, you just can't tell where. On the lighting and camera side, I am slightly biased here in that I mentioned that I went to film school, and I mentioned that I did a little bit in the film business, but very, very little. Again, other things kind of happened, and yeah, I shot a couple of films, but no big career for me. You know, that's fine, that's cool. However, I did work with a lot of interesting people. Now, I'll say that a lot of the people I worked with, especially on the camera side, they were okay. There were some really nasty pieces of work. There were some god-awful pieces of work. There were also a couple of gems, a couple of really nice people. And I think this is a universal thing. If you have had a situation or connection to somebody, however long or short, however deep or shallow, if they've done well, if they're a really good person, it doesn't matter if you're jealous or not, you can stand back and go, hey, I'm genuinely pleased for this person. I'm genuinely so happy. And I've worked for Tom Townend before. So Tom Townend was the DP for Attack the Block. I worked for him. I think it was National Film School. I'm really struggling to remember, but I do remember him. I remember him being a lovely person, courteous, considerate, very skilled, very generous as well when it came to the time. And if you were on his team, you were lucky to be on his team. And so when I realized who had shot this film, and when I saw this little moment of him, just a little bit, that they caught on camera when some of the cast are mucking around, and he's walking around looking through his viewfinder and just looking a bit confused at what the cast are doing, I was just like, I was so happy for him. So happy for him. There we go. Right, so my voice is almost going, which is a good sign, but I just wanted to very quickly talk about the ending of the film as well, and the implications, because I say in my piece about how the police haven't been called because they're not trusted, and yet you do see the girls escape, and they clearly will have contacted somebody when they ran away. And you know that other people have been impacted by this. All these monsters have walked through the streets of a London suburb at night and nobody has seen them. I don't believe that for a second. They would have had other interactions. Plus, you have the meteorite that killed one of the creatures, you know, and the gang see it and go, oh my goodness, that's a big creature. Because you can see the creature sort of melded into the meteorite. So these things are out there. This block was attacked. This area was attacked. There were aliens. And yes, you could say, oh, yeah, but Moses burned all of them in a fire. No, he didn't. No, because Sam lives on the very first floor. And she's got a dead creature in her lounge. She's also, as well, a nurse. She's very down to earth. She is not likely to be disbelieved by the police. Well, obviously, when talking about something that's normal, like a crime, and not something like, you know, an intergalactic invasion. But then you have the girls' flat, which has an alien, or two aliens in it. It also has, of course, a body without a head on it. You have a burnt alien by the bins. You have several burnt aliens in a flat that's been blown up by a gas explosion. The police, it's not like the police don't have any evidence. They've talked about doing a sequel to this, and I think a sequel is in development. And there's a lot of stuff that I'd be very interested to see how they do it. But one of the things that interests me most about this is how they will play the whole police angle. Because if you said, oh, they just bought a load of big dogs and Moses, like, this is what I'm guessing they might do is that Moses was the cause of all the deaths. He brought a bunch of large dogs into the building. They ran wild and killed a bunch of people. I mean, that's not the case. Oh yeah, by the way, there's another monster in the lift. The lift that Moses got out of at the end of the film. Think about that. You know that one of those monsters is intact. It's dead, but it's intact because it's in the very lift that Moses gets out of at the end of the film, which is nuts. But yeah, what are they going to do? Are they going to hide it out? Is it all going to be hush hush? Because this is England, and England doesn't really do the X-Files, you know, it's not cool enough. Plus, so many people have been impacted by this. Are they going to shut all the girls up, or the guys? Are they going to shut the families up who want to know what's gone on? It's not like all the families have a lot of close relations. You know, I mentioned before, Dennis. You know, his relationship with what I assume is his father is not exactly the most close. But the father is still going to want to know why his son ended up decapitated. And then you have Jerome, and this is the thing that I find unintentionally heartbreaking. Because at the end of the film, when all the people, the residents, are down at the base and they're looking up, they're, what's going on? What's happened? And they're chanting as well for Moses, Moses, who saved the block. You've actually got, I think it's either Jerome's sister or the person visiting Jerome. And you just know that at that moment in time, they have no idea that Jerome is probably dead in a hallway. I mean, again, Jerome is never confirmed as dead. They could do something with that. Also, as well, right at the end, when Pest takes the two remaining guys with him, and they walk out to just face their fate, whatever happens. Of course, they get met by the police, but there should be a body around there. Jerome should be there, so. We'll see. Oh no, sorry. I've just realised. You can tell this is off the cuff, but that would have been the next floor down. Because I think this is. I don't know. I don't know how that all works out. Maybe that is the hallway leading up to the drug den, or maybe that is the floor below where Jerome got killed. So who knows? In terms of other plot things that I was thinking about, the idea that Moses took all the blame, that his cuts didn't really heal, and they would do that so that his scar could be bigger, so it could be more iconic, so it would be easier to make him look cool in a sequel. He would also have a very desiccated kind of relationship with everybody else. What would Sam do? Would Sam stay in the block? Because if Sam stayed in the block, well, let's face it, there are a couple of people in that block that are now consider her part of the gang, whether she likes it or not. But because she's about to go into the legal system and tell police that aliens exist, who knows what happens to her. And the one that really, really interests me is Pest. And it's mostly about it's the actor, actually. It's the situation with him. He did a whole bunch of films because Pest comes across fantastic in this film. He's the most charismatic. And yeah, he went on and did a bunch of films, film roles, and I think he did a TV series and stuff like that. He did a lot more than most of the other people, apart from the ones that made it big. But after doing those roles, I think he either got bored with it or he decided to do something else. I read somewhere that he did some wrestling, and I also read that he'd become a chef. And I'm going to tread carefully here because this is a political thing and a social thing. And I know I do not have the knowledge to speak very clearly on this. But if he had moved away or had just found a better career or a direction, because, let's face it, he's a Caucasian. So therefore there was a chance that he could have maybe gotten a lift up that some of his gangmates didn't have. And then imagine 10-15 years later if he has to return to the block because of another event or another invasion. Well, suddenly Pest might actually be he might be the normal guy. He might be the regular Caucasian white guy who's older, who doesn't understand the block anymore and is a little scared of it. And Moses, who stayed, or maybe even gone into prison, been incarcerated, has a much, much darker view of the world. And so those two, who were very close, are now very far apart. That would make a wonderful setup, I think, for any kind of sequel. So there we go. Right, now I'm just going to quickly scan through here. I think that's about it. Yep, that's it for me. So I'm going to very roughly chop this together and then I'll stick it up as a waffle. I will admit on this, there's a lot that I could take away from making that first video. You know, I didn't watch the film enough. I should have done the frame by frame on the film before I even wrote the script. I also needed to learn a lot better just how to use footage that was not film footage, so that I didn't have issues with copyright, and then had to sort of backfill with just stills on the audio that I'd recorded and mixed, and it made the first video a bit of a mess. So I want to obviously do that better next time. But if I do that as well, do I cover more of this sort of stuff, or do I keep a waffle separate? I don't know. I mean, this recording is probably the closest that I'll get to a vanity project on this channel. I don't know. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, if you listen to all of this, thank you so much. I can't believe you would do. But you have my thanks. And yeah, all the best, and speak to you soon. Bye.